Well, during the morning, we were really just trying to figure out what was happening, and no one kind of knew. And I know for myself, I've never seen a tragedy that extreme before, or to see or be able to process what to do. In our mind, we are taught how to look at certain situations and access the scene and kind of get in our mind a layout of how to conquer some of the challenges that we may have during the course of the day. And so in my mind, I knew I could just never figure out, how do we get up there? What do we do? This is a plane, so many people are involved. So during the time of trying to process it and everyone's talking, the tone alarm goes off, and 105 truck got sent to the trade center to respond. So we watched them go out and was just waiting to see whether or not the engine company 219, where I was assigned for the day, was going to get sent out, and it took a long time for that to happen. Eventually, we got sent out after 2 calls prior to that. One was food on the stove, and the other one was a suspicious package. But it took a while for us to get dispatched out to go and respond. We knew that all of the members from 105 went so much earlier during the day, and we were just trying to make sure that they were okay, but in ourselves too, just trying to figure out the best way that we can help. When we finally responded, we went through the Brooklyn Battery Tunnel. As we were going through the tunnel, there was a few things besides my nerves and not knowing what I'm getting myself into, and fear. We started to go through the tunnel, and there was this wind that came through the tunnel that shook the engine. I didn't know what it was, but in my mind, I was younger. I watched a lot of cartoons, and so I thought about like this Scooby-Doo episode where there was a cave in and all the rocks fell in front of the cave, and I just kept thinking, we're gonna have to claw ourselves out of this situation and be moving rocks, and we're never gonna get to the other side to help people. I didn't know whether or not the tunnel we were going in, whether it was gonna collapse, whether there was gonna be water coming through the tunnels. I didn't know, because it was just weird to me to have a vehicle that has 500 gallons of water shake in any way, shape, or form the way that it did. And so I remember the chauffeur stopped the rig, asked everyone was they okay, and then the officer just told the chauffeur to proceed slowly. So as he started to proceed to the end of the tunnel, we could see breaks of light come through the end of the tunnel. So I knew that we had some type of an opening. But as we got to the end of the tunnel, you can see that it was this large white cloud, and it kind of looked like a blizzard. And so I didn't know what to make of it, because in my mind, I just never imagined anything like that. So we stopped the rig, and we took some materials off the rig. We took our bags to do any type of patient care. We took extra cylinders, and we took tools because we didn't know what we were going to be doing next. But I remember as we were coming out of the tunnel on foot, there were people walking towards us that were covered in this white soot and white smoke. And I remember a woman telling me that she was asthmatic, and she was panicking and coughing and wheezing. And so I remember us just trying to pour water on her face to get a lot of the dust off of her, and giving them the best advice we could, which was just walk through the tunnel, walk to the Brooklyn side, because it would get you out. We knew we just came from there and there was no traffic. And so we were like, just walk, just keep walking. We proceeded to move forward. So at this point, the engine was moved ahead of us, and since we saw that some of the civilians needed our attention, we were on foot and we started to walk. Usually when you go someplace and you have to respond to a particular area, you get a ticket. And the ticket has all the information of where you need to go, where you need to be. And at this point, we were told to go to the command post, and it gave us the street address for the command post. So he took the rig and proceeded in front of us, and we were walking behind the rig. And then he stopped just to figure out what the surroundings were and kind of look to see where everyone else was, because as we were coming out, we saw that there were a lot of rigs that were abandoned. The rest of the members proceeded to walk forward to see if we could find the street that the command post was on. And as we started to walk towards the World Trade Center area, myself and the officer and the chauffeur were the only people that had radios at the time. Right now, all of the members have access to radios, but during that time, 2 other positions on the engine did not have a radio. So I remember walking the truck, the engine officer was in front of me and the chauffeur was still by the engine. And as we were proceeding forward on my radio, all I could hear was, "We're under attack, we're under attack." And then I heard this loud noise that sounded like a plane was flying overhead. So in my mind, I'm like, are these planes gonna be running into buildings like all day? Like, what is going on? And then all I can hear is my officer. I don't know what he saw because I could barely see. He just said, "Run, run, run." So we all ran, turned around and ran. We dropped the stuff that we had and we ran. And he said, "Get on the rig." But in my mind, I was like, I'm not getting on the rig. The buildings are falling all over the place. I'm going to get crushed in a rig. And at that time, it made sense to me that I would run to the back of the rig and sit on the back step. So the back step is where we have to put our feet on in order to take the hose off the back. But in hindsight, it didn't make sense to me because if anything was going to fall on the engine, I was going to get hurt. But all I kept thinking is, I don't want to get crushed. I don't want to get crushed. I might be able to make it if I'm on the back. And then as I ran to the back, I heard the officers, before he got on the rig, he was like, "Put your mask on, put your mask on." And then I just remember putting my mask on and it just got completely black. Like I couldn't see anything. And I just sat there and I waited to die. I didn't know if anything was gonna fall. I didn't know what happened. And I just put my mask on, I did what I was told, and I was just waiting for something to happen. So it took a while for the smoke to clear. It felt like an eternity, but it wasn't that long. At that point, I knew that we were okay, so I went to the engine to see if the boss and the rest of the members were okay, and everyone was fine. They were actually better off than me because they were able to roll up the windows, but so we all got off the rig again. The officer was assessing everybody to make sure that they were fine. And then we proceeded to take more material off of the engine because we knew at that point we didn't know what we were going to get ourselves into. So we went to proceed forward, and then we started to run into some more members. And then we started to try and talk about a game plan. We never found the command post. And so we started to try to assess what was happening. So at that point, I'm covered in white smoke. I have dust and debris and soot, and I'm trying to see, and I had to keep wiping my eyes. And so we found another rig. We opened up the stang on the top of the rig, which is like a deck gun, and tried to get water out of the abandoned rig so that we could clean ourselves, because you can't operate if you can't see and you can't kind of gather yourself. And so we collectively came up with an idea, because it was cars on fire, it was other buildings on fire. So we needed to find a water source. Being on the engine, that's our primary job, is to find where the water is. So we went into buildings thinking, maybe some of them would have tanks that we could feed into to kind of put out some of these fires, because we were getting no pressure from the hydrants. There was no water coming out of any of the hydrants. And so as we went around to try to assess some of the buildings, we knew that our water sources were non-existent. So at that point, we decided to collect some of the holes that we had on a lot of the engines, especially the abandoned ones. So we gathered all the 2.5-inch lines, and then we proceeded to connect them together, and we fed the lines all the way down to the river to be able to pump water from the river and draft it and be able to connect it to a tower ladder so that we could be able to get water to put out some of these building fires and the fires that were happening with some of the cars that were on fire at the time. And so after that grueling process of trying to get that done, we started to now process the fact that we're still around. I remember before I started working and we started to get everything together, I took a quarter out of my pocket at that time. I know a lot of people that are younger may not have this experience of putting a quarter in a payphone. And I actually called my my nephew's grandmother because her number is the only number that I could memorize at the time. And I called her and told her to call the rest of my family because I wasn't sure whether or not I was going to live or die. And so I knew at that point that I needed to do that in order to process what I needed to do next. And I knew that if I didn't get resolved, that I wouldn't be able to work. So if I spent most of the time trying to process what I was doing, then I wouldn't be able to do my job. And I think that's how it is every day. Like if I really sat down to process what I do, what my job really is, I wouldn't, and I don't think my brain would allow me to be able to do and sacrifice as much and to not process family and to not process your future and to not process your life and to be able to push forward through all of that in order to do the job that you have to do. So that was my phone call of processing. That was my phone call of resolve. So I told her, you know, if you see my family, if you talk to them, just tell them that I'm okay. And if I don't make it out, that I'm dying doing what I love to do. You know, this is what I signed up for. I've developed a passion for it throughout the years. And I was young on the job. I came in 1999. And so to be able to process the magnitude of my job wasn't quite there. I knew I had previously gotten injured at a fire, and I knew the seriousness of my job, but not to the extent of a terrorism attack or the feeling of being on a scene and not knowing whether the terrorist attack was committed to just the air, that it wasn't on land, and that someone wasn't gonna come and shoot me from around a corner. I didn't know how thorough they thought out the whole process of attacking America. All of these scenarios played in my mind, but I knew I had to get to a level of resolve. And once I did that, then I was able to do whatever needed to be done because I didn't have to fear death anymore in a weird kind of way. We started to see some of the members from my firehouse that just came down to the site. And we proceeded to figure out where was 105. Because 105 went before we did, and we were trying to see where the rest of the members were. So we walked around to all these different buildings to see if we could find the rig, and we never did. And also in the process, we were trying to help a lot of the civilians. And then during the course of the evening, we were helping to dig for survivors as well as we got closer and closer to Ground Zero to see the devastation there. We knew that that day we wouldn't be able to make a significant dent because it was still so much tragedy happening, so many different hazards, or watching dismembered people and trying to figure out what was the best stream of operations. And I'm not sure at that time if the fire department had an opportunity to really process and assess that too. So we were all kind of independently falling on the training that we've had in order to proceed and move forward. 105, the engine was crushed, and all of the members of 105 died during 9/11. I had swap tours early in the morning with John Chapora, and I was assigned to work on 105 that day.
To a certain degree, obviously, there was some unknown confusion. You know, who was doing what, who's working where. Ultimately, pretty much maybe halfway through the day, they gave us assignments to basically look for remains. We were 2 blocks away, and we were lined up shoulder to shoulder, starting on the street corner, and we would walk down the block. And every step that you took would be a little dust cloud, because you're walking through approximately 6 inches of powdered concrete. You know, it was sort of like the Peanuts character, Pigpen. When you walked, you took a step and a dust cloud came up. That's basically it was. And any part or fragment of remains that you found basically had to be logged, cataloged, and it was definitely interesting to the point where you can't imagine how devastation like that can actually occur. You're walking down the street and we found human body parts. Found a female's wrist. You knew it was a female with the fingers because the fingers had nail polish on it. You go down a couple more, you know, maybe another 200 feet, and there's part of a deceased individual through the front windshield of a parked vehicle. So it woke you up, it shook you up, and at the same time, though, you focused on, we got to get this done. Let's, you know, let's get to it. Things can't wait. We got to, you know, try to regroup and get it back together again. The original ceremonial unit for the fire department was actually run out of Proby School, as we call it, which was part of the fire academy. At that morning, out of 12,000 New York City firefighters on the job, there were only 5 of us that technically were assigned to the ceremonial unit. So what transpired was we went down there and we were on the pile with everybody else. And at that point, let's say, you know, 1,000 people were on the pile. Some of them were stockbrokers with the wingtip shoes. Some of them were civilians. Some of them were members of any type of emergency service. And a couple days later, they actually came and found the 5 of us digging separately on the pile in the so-called 1,000 people that were there. So they called us and sat us down and basically said, we anticipate 500 firefighters were killed. We don't have an exact number, but you 5 guys are the only 5 that know the logistics of a full line of duty funeral. So we're going to take you off the pile, send you back to the academy, make it work. We got more important things to worry about. And we went back to the academy and we took one of our large conference rooms and we started getting faxes from headquarters, faxes from family members looking to do some type of closure as far as funerals. Well, because there were approximately 19,500 fragments that were there, obviously the DNA wasn't up and running and the medical examiner didn't have the resources to really do that large volume at that time. We came up with the idea of calling it a memorial service. The memorial service was a full line of duty funeral, except there was no casket. We would carry either a helmet up the center aisle of the church or either a portrait of that individual, a photo of that individual up the aisle. Within a week, we were doing approximately 8 to 12 services a day, 7 days a week for almost 7 months straight. The record we did was 22 in a 24-hour period. It got a little hectic at times, but we expanded from there And that's pretty much how it all came about. Total came down to 343. And as of right now today, we're looking at approximately 280 members who have passed post 9/11 from the cancers. So we're still doing our funerals, we're still doing our memorials, our plaque dedications, everything that is going on pertaining to 9/11 to this day, 20 years later.
At the time I was working on FDNY EMS, and my friend was also recently on FDNY EMS, and I called him up and I said, JP, did you see the TV? And he said, no. I said, 2 planes just hit the Trade Center and they're recalling everybody. We have to go in. I said, I'm coming to pick you up. And I took the keys to my parents' car because my car had been stolen not that long ago. And I took the keys to my parents' car and I went to my friend's house and picked him up in Staten Island, and we went to Station 22 on Staten Island and went in there, and nobody knew what to do. It was nobody knew how to act. Nobody knew where to go, what to do. There was no direction. So at some point we just jumped in an ambulance, and the ambulance was loaded with people, and we took it down to the Staten Island ferry. And we were told when we were down there that there was going to be a lot of people coming off the ferry terminal, and it was going to be a lot of patients that were going to need patient care. So as we were doing that, we were setting up triage, we were setting up a care center so that we can take people in when they got off the ferry, treat them, put them in ambulances, send them out to area hospitals. And as that was going on, I was seeing friends of mine as firefighters also getting on the ferry to respond in. So at that time, they had a little bit of a different role than we had. We were waiting and waiting for those victims and those people to come that were supposed to be in really bad shape. And that at that time, that was our role, and that's what we wanted to do. And that moment never came. The ferries weren't loaded with people. The ferries didn't have people that were sick and injured and needed our help. So in that moment, when we wanted to do nothing more than to help and to be involved, that was a very hard situation because you almost felt like useless. You know, you were there to help and you felt useless. You weren't doing what you were meant to be doing. So we stayed there a while until basically they said, you know, there's nobody coming. This is what it is, you know. And then we all wanted to get on the ferry just like everybody else. We want to get on the ferry. We want to go over. We want to do stuff. And they said, there isn't anything for you to do there. It's not worth it for you to go there. That was a very tough moment because, like I said, that's not what we're meant to do. We're meant to respond in and go do our part. So the next day, I worked at a station that was it was called Cumberland Station 31, which is pretty much right outside the Brooklyn Bridge, which is very close to the Trade Center. I went into work, and again, you know, they hand you the keys to an ambulance, and you're thinking, why am I getting on an ambulance right now? Like, this is not where I need to be. I need to be at the Trade Center. I need to be helping the people that were also wearing uniforms, civilians that were lost, my friends that I don't know where they are. The whole thing was it just really messes with you. And then when we were at the station, they ended up recalling units because now they did want for us to go out there, and they recalled the units, had us go back to the station. And then we took a van that was operated by the police department. We all jumped in the van and then went out to the Trade Center. Now that we were at the Trade Center, we were kind of figuring out the multiple roles that we were going to do. So we had set up a temporary morgue, because at that time we realized, again, that they weren't injured. It was more of people that were trapped, that were unfortunately not alive anymore. And it was pretty quickly apparent that it was more of a recovery thing pretty quickly. When you went down there, there was you can't imagine how much heat must have been in the building, because there was just plumes of smoke coming out of piles that were all different colors, yellows, purples, greens. And there was just no way anybody could live through something like that. So they put us in sectors, and with the sectors they gave us golf carts that are called gators. We call them gators. And they basically, as everybody was digging through the pile, if they found anything, if they found a bone, if they found a uniform, anything that they found, they would put it in a bag and they'd call us to go pick it up. And when we went to go pick it up, we would bring it to the morgue, where the temporary morgue, where now they had doctors and stuff. And the minute anything was found, you'd have a tremendous amount of uniforms, police department, fire department. Everybody would go to the morgue to be with the doctors and to see if there was anything that could be identified to help bring everybody's family members and coworkers home. It was just an experience you can't describe. It was a time that will always be embedded, in someone's brain if you've had an experience with it. And during that whole time, thinking about your friends that that were there. Prior to 9/11, in June of 2001, there was a gentleman by the name of Dave Fontana, and Dave Fontana worked at Squad 1. Squad 1 responded in on 9/11, but in June of 2001, Dave went into Metrotech, and in Metrotech, which is our headquarters, there's an honor wall. And the honor wall in Metrotech had a name on the wall, and the name was John Leary. Now that was my grandfather. So Dave worked in the firehouse that my grandfather was in when he died in World War II. So it turns out that Dave was also a history buff, and he was also a substitute teacher on his days off with the fire department. Dave contacted my father and said, "I'm sorry you don't know me. I'm a firefighter. I worked in the same house that your father worked in. Could you tell me about your dad?" So my father didn't really know his dad because he was very, very young when his father passed away. Dave Fontana, he went ahead and hired a private investigator and met people that were there when my grandfather passed away. My dad, who never knew his father, was now introduced to the people that were there with my grandfather when he died in Germany. And Dave was the one that brought us that peace, or brought my dad that peace, to where even to this day, my dad meets with people that were with his father when he passed away. Fast forward to September of 2001, and it was Dave's wedding anniversary, and his wife went to the restaurant that they had their first date in, and his wife was there waiting for him to get off. And that morning, when the call came in, he jumped on the truck and went over to the Trade Center, and unfortunately, Dave never came home. So the stuff that he did for my family, the stuff that the fire department's done for my family, it's something that will always be true to my heart. It's something that always sticks out in my mind. At Dave's funeral, normally at our department funerals, all the uniformed members line up in the street and the family stands on the sidewalk waiting to go in. I remember standing on the sidewalk with the family because I wasn't a firefighter, I was on EMS, you know. And then my family was there as well, and we were really kind of a family with the Fontanas. And I remember Dave's captain at the time, Captain Feminella. He saw me across the street and I'm standing on the sidewalk and he said, "Leary." I said, "Yeah, Cap." He says, "You're coming in with us." And they lined me up with the uniform members and I went in with them. So that meant just as much to me as it did being a part of the family, his physical blood family, as it did being with his uniform family. So the experience that I had, again, I'll never forget. They go far beyond, and even to this day, I still have many.
It was, it was a day, normally, we have a standard plan of attack when we pull up at an ordinary fire or, and you know what you're doing. So here it was, you're just trying to do whatever you can do, assist whatever people could be assisted. Unfortunately, I know they set up a lot of triage centers. They expected a lot of injured. There wasn't that many injured. Most people were killed. So, it was a difficult day. I mean, most guys nobody knew what the head count was, but you just had to assume the amount of people that were up in that building that, there was a serious loss to the FDNY that day. So we spent the first couple months like everyone, pretty much everyone, all first responders, and we were up there digging. There was a lot of fathers that lost sons, so there was a group from the firehouse that I'm from. Even when you weren't assigned up there to dig, guys were on their own time or would go to be with the fathers, to comfort them, to help them, to assist them. And then had gotten a call from the chief of the fire academy saying that we need to meet. And I'm like, all right. So we go up to see him, and the ceremony prior to that only consisted of a few members, and that they needed to, start putting together funerals. So we asked them, okay, you have a book? You have something that you could, and they're like, nah, you'll figure it out. So one of the first funerals we did was Alan Feinberg was in Marlboro, New Jersey. Never did a funeral before. Now we have a Jewish member, which is going to be slightly different, and we just kind of winged it, you know what I mean? And a lot of trial and error. Each time, just like anything else, you get better and better. And so one of the good things that came out of a tragedy is we've really become too good at this, you know what I mean? And we've been around to other departments to assist them because, other departments haven't had a line of duty line of duty death in 100 years. And now here we had the opportunity to come in and help them out. All the little attention to detail, I truly believe that helps the family heal afterwards. Maybe not, right away, but, all the little details that they start to remember, that helps, collectively we take the worst day of their life and just make it a little bit better. People that volunteer to come be a part of the ceremony are mostly the workers, you know what I mean? Like, not everybody works it the same, but if they come to be a part of this, in every firehouse, EMS station, there's those certain members that go above and beyond. And those members tend to gravitate towards us, you know what I mean? So, like I say, there's no I in team. Without one, as John would say, somebody's got to be the big toe, but without all the little, all the people stepping forward, from over here, just loading trucks 2-3 days before a funeral. There's guys over here loading trucks with the equipment. You know what I mean? It's almost like, the roadies. When the rock star gets all the credit, but without the staff and everybody backing them, it's not going to happen. It's not possible.
So we're here at the academy. We're getting everybody equipped. Certainly, there's not enough radios and ambulances and equipment to staff, everybody who's at training. So how do we move buildings worth of first responders down to this site? Well, we have a MTA hub, which is our bus services, and they were right at the base of the academy, and one of our officers had gone down there and basically commandeered city buses. And the city buses came up to our building, and we started loading in on the city buses. And we started to make our way down to the scene in a convoy kind of format. We're filled with people, we have our equipment, we're ready to go. There's an odd and eerie silence that's going on. Like we don't really know what we're walking into. We know that 2 planes had hit the towers. We knew that had to be a bad thing for the city, that there was going to be a lot of people who were hurt, but we weren't really sure what was happening. We didn't even know if the attack was over, right? Like, was there going to be other buildings, that other planes or other people being attacked? We just didn't know. But we knew we had to go, and we did. And we got on a bus and we started going down, and I remember being on the highway in the bus, and you could see the towers from where we were. And, the first tower fell. It disappeared, which was unbelievable, right? This can't even be true. So, we continue to make our way down there. And by the time we get down there, we're all in the buses, we're pulling up, several blocks away. Now there is a pile of twisted steel and dust and things. And by the time we were getting down there, the second tower had fallen. And we got enveloped in the dust. We were still in the bus, so we were somewhat safe from that. But now the second tower had gone down. So it was very chaotic. I mean, obviously nobody expected in our lifetime to see these 2 buildings that we grew up with that overshadowed our everyday lives to be, in a twisted mess in the middle of Manhattan, the biggest and most important city in the world, if you ask a New Yorker. So we started, getting ourselves prepared to respond down to where the pile, as we called it, ended up being. And I was a more senior instructor at that point, so I had been assigned to what we would call forward triage. Forward triage meaning the location closest to the event, so that I can triage out, which is medically sort out the patients from critical to non-critical patients. So we were assigned with a group down there, and they put us in a building that was like very close, like right on the pile. We were going to stage there. And it didn't take a long time to figure out there was nobody to triage. There just was nobody to triage. And anybody who was there was under the pile, and it was still very early in the event, so there weren't a lot of people there that we could help. So people who could get out got out and ran on their own to get out of the way of things, and people who couldn't get out were still under the rubble. So there was nobody to triage at that point. And the group that I was in converted into a forward morgue. And, it was really about finding and identifying people who were in the rubble. So we did that for what felt like an eternity. I think it was somewhere in the neighborhood of 30 plus hours that I was down there doing that with that group. Now remember that we had gotten down there on city buses. There weren't radios to give us. We all had our own equipment, so we were supplied in that sense, but there was really no plan to get us back out of there, right? Like they got us in there, and we were all there for the long term to just get this job done. And we were all very committed to doing that because we had lost hundreds of our own people in there as well. Not only the people who filled these buildings, but the people who went to save these people who filled these buildings. We had lost them all. And, you know, we weren't going to quit. So I remember just being, you know, it was sometime the next day, I was just so exhausted. The type of exhaustion that doesn't allow for your knees to hold the rest of your body weight up. And I had made my way up to where the staging location was, and people at that point had been sending blankets and bags of clothing. And, you know, they're trying to do anything they could. The city really did come together and try to support the first responders. And I remember just falling asleep on the concrete on top of a bag of like blankets, and it started to rain, and you know, I couldn't go any further. So I slept there for a little while and then got back up and went back down to the site. And it was a while before I realized at some point I gotta go home. You know, my family doesn't know whether I'm in this rubble or not, because I showed up to work and didn't come home either, right? And there were no cell phones that worked because the tower was on top of the towers that just went down. So there was no real service. We were busy. Like, I didn't get to call my family. You know, cell phones weren't a big deal back then. Not everybody had one. So I had to figure out how we were gonna get home, or at least how I was gonna get home. I had 2 small children at that time. I actually ended up hitchhiking from other first responders and people who were dropping things off down at the city, hitchhiking my way back to the Bronx. And I went directly to my daughter's high school because I hadn't seen her, just to let her know I was okay, you know. And then I went home, you know, I'd showered and I was covered in dust and dirt and exhausted. I slept for a while and then got back up and went back down. And that became our routine. You know, our routine was keep going until you find everybody. You know, everybody was just really unified in that mission. And you didn't think about what you were doing or why you were doing it. You just knew you had to do it. And I think people felt like that in New York City too. People didn't know what to do or how to do it. They just felt like they needed to do something. And some people would bring food, or some people would drop like blankets or, you know, waters, or they would line the West Side Highway. I'll never forget this. The West Side Highway for us is a big highway. It's a very busy highway. And there was nobody on it. It was closed to first responders only. And they would line the highway with thank you signs, you know. Very similar to what we saw in this pandemic with the, you know, banging the pots at 7 p.m. and things like that. So it was a lot of support for the first responders. But it was a difficult time, you know, and I think, you know, 20 years later, I still smell it. Like, as if it was yesterday. I think most people do, at least the people that were there. But now we're 20 years into this. There are people who work here who weren't even born, you know, when this happened. So this is really a story to them. So it's important that we tell the story. So I'm thankful that you're telling the story, because I think people need to hear it.